I was tasked with coming up with something that I enjoy to share with people, and beer happens to be it. Some of you may not know that I like to brew my own beer on occasion. I've brewed a couple of my own. I plan to continue doing that, so without further ado, let's hop into beer. Some of you may ask, what is it? It's an alcoholic beverage produced by the saccharification of starch and fermentation of the resulting sugars. The starch and saccharification enzymes are often derived from malted cereal grains, most commonly malted barley and malted wheat. Now, some of you, those of you who aren't chemistry buffs, may respond to that by saying, what? So I'll explain some of those more foreign terms to you, what that actually means. So starting off with saccharification, basically that's just breaking down a carbohydrate into its component sugar molecules, so that the yeast inside the beer can eat it and turn it into the wonderfulness we know as alcohol. Fermentation is that process. It's converting carbohydrates into alcohols and carbon dioxide using, in the case of beer, yeast. Starch is just a collection of a bunch of glucose molecules, as I said, saccharification breaks down those molecules into stuff that the yeast can eat. Malted basically means a dry germinated grain. When it's dried and germinated, it releases enzymes that allow the starches to convert into sugar molecules. So beer actually has a really interesting history. It dates back to as far as 10,000 BC. Experts even speculate that it had a hand in sparking the Neolithic Revolution, which is basically the beginning of agricultural life for humans. There's archaeological evidence of beer brewing found in almost every continent: North and South America, Europe, Africa, and Asia, each favoring some different but some similar brewing styles, each using sometimes different starches for fermentation. Beer was actually also mentioned in a bunch of different ancient writings. They were written on, actually the oldest known recipe for anything was beer, written onto a Sumerian tablet in about 3000 BC. It was mentioned in the hymn to Ninsaka, which was a Sumerian goddess of beer, I guess. It was mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh and also the Elba tablets. Another interesting little piece is that in ancient times, beer was used as rations for pyramid workers. So they would get about a gallon of beer a day for their work. So another piece that I found that's really interesting is that there's stories of totem sticks being passed on through generations, and it's speculated that this is what the yeast was transferred from one batch into the next for. The concept of yeast wasn't figured out until Louis Pasteur in the late or early 1900s. So nobody even knew why beer existed and what caused it to happen until then. So basically, these brewing sticks would pass the yeast from one batch onto the next and through generations, and gather more and more complex strains of yeast throughout the years. Another thing I found out was the Reinheitsgebot. And basically, that's a German brewing purity law from the 1400s and 1500s. It would mandate that beer only contain water, malted barley, and hops. If you had anything other than that, it was considered a crime in your beer. So that's pretty interesting. The oldest known continuously operating brewery today is the Weinstephan Abbey Brewery, which dates to around 1040 AD, and it was actually a monastery for Benedictine monks. They would brew their own beer and sell it commercially to surrounding towns. The terms beer and ale are used kind of interchangeably today, but historically ale was produced using malted grains, while beer was actually believed to have derived from the word barley. It's now been discovered that beer is actually believed to refer to a sweet alcoholic beverage fermented from fruits and apples and pears and stuff like that. And it's actually more similar to modern day cider. So the term beer actually more refers to cider than to actual beer, which I found pretty interesting. So next I'm going to go into the different components of beer. There's, as you can see, quite a few different pieces that go into it. Very few of these are actually required. Like I've mentioned before, the only things that have to be in there for it to be considered beer is water, some kind of starch, yeast and, well, actually hops aren't even necessary to create a beer unless you want it to actually be good, in my opinion. Starting off with the first component, the biggest component of beer is water. It's usually the biggest part of beer. The remainder is usually alcohol. So if you have a 6% alcohol beer, probably the rest of the 94% is water. It has such a big effect on taste. It actually resulted in some regional tendencies that we know today. For instance, Dublin, Ireland has a lot of hard water, and that kind of lends itself to making stouts. So that's how we came to know Guinness today. Pilsners or pale ales are good for having soft water, and the Pilsner region, which is Pilsner's namesake, had really soft water. So that's how that came to be known. Also, gypsum, which is popular, which is in the water in Burton, England, is found in the water, and that's where a lot of pale ales originated from. So, moving on to the next component, we have grains. It's typically any recognizable beer that you drink today will be based on either malted barley or malted wheat, and well, at least based on it. At least it will at least have those ingredients in it, and the grains are usually roasted or kilned to varying degrees of darkness, and that affects the flavor of the beer pretty substantially. I actually have some here. This is a kiln barley. You can see different colors in it, and that will affect the flavor of the beer pretty substantially. At the bottom of the pie chart, I guess you would call it, you'll see the lighter grains, and that's pale malts. Usually, it's the primary ingredient for any beers. It imparts the most sugar into the beer, and usually that's where any recognizable beer will start from. Will at least have in it. Moving around, we have the Vienna and Munich malts. It's a little bit darker. Crystal malt is the caramel one. It's probably around the top of the chart right there. And then chocolate malt and black patent. There's actually some black patent in there. It's a really dark. It's usually where you get the flavor from all of your stouts and porters and stuff like that. So malt extract. It's kind of just a way for homebrewers to skip the complicated mashing process or the time-consuming mashing process, which is basically you have to take crushed malted barley and steep it in hot water for like an hour and a half to 2 hours, and then sparge the grains, which means wash the sugary malt from the grain husks. And that process has been greatly simplified for the home brewer. Now we just have these nice little like packages of like dry sticky powder. You can also use syrup, which is they sell them in like cans at the homebrew stores or whatever. So the next component, and arguably one of the most important, is yeast. Without it, your favorite alcoholic beverages probably wouldn't exist today. Every drop of beer passes through a yeast cell during the fermentation process. As I mentioned before, it takes in sugar and converts it into alcohol, carbon dioxide, and other byproducts like esters and stuff like that. It actually has different types of yeast actually have a pretty huge effect on the flavor of it. Different strains produce flavors ranging from mild or dry to sweet and mild to spicy. Can also even affect the body of the beer, how thick it is, and when you're drinking it. The purity is also incredibly important in yeast. You can't just go and buy like bread yeast because it will often be contaminated with wild yeast or other biological things that will harm the flavor of the beer in the end. It's typically divided into two basic subtypes, top fermenting and bottom fermenting. Basically, that just boils down to where the yeast does most of its work. Top fermenting, obviously, most of the work is done at the top of the fermentation process. Bottom is bottom. Top fermenting yeast is usually used to create ales and like stouts, porters, wheat beers, that kind of thing. While bottom fermenting is usually used to make lagers and steam beers. and it's usually created under refrigerated conditions, making it a little bit more difficult for the home brewer to do, because you got to keep it in some kind of specialized refrigeration container for while it's brewing. Other common types of yeast are champagne yeast, which is alcohol-resistant type of yeast, and that's used to make like barley wines, which is a stronger type of beer that can get up to like 20% alcohol. They're pretty crazy. Also lambics, which use wild yeast, which is kind of weird to me. It kind of gives the beer like a sour taste, which is odd. So another interesting piece is that you can actually, if you have a commercial beer and there's some sort of sediment in the bottom of the beer, usually that's yeast, and you can probably use that beer as like a starter for your own kind of beer if you want it to taste in it somewhat similar to that kind. So hops. Hops is usually the source of bitterness. I actually have some here. It's dried, but I'm going to pass it around. It's really pungent and smells interesting if you like that.
I'm familiar.
Yeah, I think it smells good. That's me. So it's the source. It's usually the source of bitterness in your beer. There's something called an alpha acid inside the hops that actually lends to bitterness in beer. It also provides protection to the beer. It has biological components to it. It actually wards off bacteria growth and stuff like that, while not having any impact on the yeast that grows in it. So it's really helpful in preserving the beer itself. There's also two different kinds of beer. I'm passing around the whole hops. There's also pellets, which kind of look like rabbit food, like green rabbit food. Let's see. There's two different kinds that are usually added to beer, flavoring or aroma. Obviously, they're kind of obvious what they do. One is for giving your beer different flavors or more complex flavors, and one is to give your beer a different aroma. And those two different things can range from spicy or woody or floral or smoky. They can each have different alcohol or acid contents, which make them more or less bitter. But usually, those types of hops lend different flavors on top of that. Like I said, the different flavor profiles. And here's like a list of a few different kinds of hops. There's a bunch of them, and they all have different bitterness components and different flavors. And when you're brewing your own, you got to figure out which one goes well with your beer, and it's kind of a process, but it's what makes it fun. So next is sugars and adjuncts. In any beer that you're brewing at home, you're probably only going to use any of these for conditioning, like in the bottle conditioning portion of your brewing, which basically means when you are trying to add the carbonation to your beer after it's been bottled, you'll put it in there to add the carbonation. It's something for the yeast to eat once the fermentation process is finished. However, some breweries like to use this as their main components, and that's how we get not so good beers. You'll usually find them labeled as American lagers. Yeah, like I said, some of these are actually interesting to add to your own as a conditioner for your beer. You can add brown sugar or honey or whatever, and it adds different flavors. Flavor profiles to the finished product. So next I'm going to, sorry, I forgot. Additional components would be like spices or you can even add oak chips to which is popular in IPAs to give it an even more like woody flavor. Fruits, which some people add cherries or strawberries or pears or whatever to their beer. Also, some stranger additions you can see at the bottom there: chocolate, coffee, milk, chili peppers. I've never had anything with milk in it. That sounds kind of weird to me. But I have had a chili pepper beer before, and that was also weird, but tasted pretty good, surprisingly. So types of beer. I'm just going to go through a couple because there's tons and tons and tons of different kinds of beer. I could probably spend the next hour just explaining the different types of beer. Pilsners. it's typically just a pale lager. It gets its name, as I said, from Pilsen, which is in the Czech Republic, or is in modern day Czech Republic, where it was first produced. These are a couple of your more common types of pilsners. Next is pale ales. This is a really broad spectrum of different types of beers. There's your ambers, your American ales, your blondes, your English bitters, your strong ales, and your Scotch ales. These all fall under pale ales. This isn't even a sample of all the different kinds of pale ales, and I couldn't fit that on one slide if I tried. So next up is Box. It's a strong German type of lager. It's usually dark, but can be lighter in certain types. Substyles include Maybach, Doppelbock, and Eisenbach. The ingredients I have here are actually for a Doppelbock, so I'll be making that over the next month or two. So yeah, and again, some more popular kinds. Stouts and porters. Obviously, you all know Guinness. It's a dark beer made from roasted barley or malts. And stout was the name for the strongest porters, and it's kind of evolved into being its own subclass now. So, last one I wanted to touch on was American lagers. Other common names are adjunct beers, pale ales. Also acceptable would be EU, Prohibition Swill, and no, that's okay, I'll have water. Other obscure and interesting types. Chicha, which is actually like native to the Andes region, typically refers to like maize beer, but can refer to any homemade drink in that area, the Andes region. Historically, it actually was created using saliva for the saccharification process. So people would chew on like corn kernels and then spit them out into a thing and then boil it, and that would be the base for their beer, which is weird. Tapai, which is an Indonesian, Malaysian like alcoholic paste. It's like they sell it in blocks, and you can use it in your cooking or whatever you want to do with it, I guess. Acerglen is a mead made with maple syrup. Mead is like a honey beer. It uses honey for its starch component. Capsicumel is a mead flavored with chili peppers. Marzen beer, known as Oktoberfest, actually one of my favorites. It's a dark, bitter, full-bodied beer. It's what was typically drank during Oktoberfest in Germany. And one of the most interesting backstories to beer is India Pale Ale. It was during the 17 and 1800s. English trade ships when England was India was a colony of England. India was a colony of England. The beers that would travel in the trade ships would not make the trip to the colonies, so they would have to add extra hops or extra alcohol to them to make them survive the trip. As I said, hops have a component to them that makes them spoil slower, has preservative properties, sorry. So, like I said, there's a ton of different kinds of beer. Each one of those circles represents a different kind of beer, and I could be here talking, and there's probably tons more that aren't even mentioned on that. I could be talking about it forever. Just to wrap up, there's a couple interesting things that I found while researching for this. There's something called autobrewery syndrome, which is a disease that where you actually get yeast in your stomach that actually causes you to produce alcohol in your stomach, which makes you drunk. So there's something so you can actually have like your own brewery inside your stomach that just keeps you continuously drunk, which I thought was pretty interesting and a problem I would like to have. Hops also is a cousin to the marijuana plant, which is pretty interesting. If they have pretty similar, yeah, like I said, they're really close relatives to each other. It also contains lupulin, which is a mild sedative. So home brews actually usually contain more hops than your traditional commercial beer. So they have like a calming effect on the person drinking them more often than not. The strongest beer in the world is 67.5% alcohol, and that's up for debate. Like a lot of people claim that that's not really true, and I've never tasted it, so I couldn't vouch for any of that. It costs $81 for a 10-ounce bottle. So if you ever got like $81 you want to blow on something that's going to get you really drunk really fast, then there's that. So the beer wave of 1814, this happened in London in 1814. A beer vat containing 3,500 barrels of beer ruptured, spilling onto the streets, ruining, destroying 2 houses, and it actually killed 9 people. So yeah, so that guy was probably. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the best way to die. So, so a Cerevisiphile is a beer enthusiast. It's interesting. In ancient Egypt, men were not allowed to brew beer. It was always the woman's job to brew beer. So, light ruins beer. So that's why you typically see dark brown or green bottles for your beer, because if light hits it for too long, it will spoil it. It will make it taste kind of gross. In ancient Babylon, the punishment for brewing bad beer and selling it would be to be drowned in your own product. So you wouldn't want to make bad beer in ancient Babylon. Let me see if I can pronounce this right. Hathroon, the Viking beer-uddered goat. The Vikings believed that this beer-uddered goat was waiting for you in Valhalla. Basically, had an infinite supply of beer out of his udder or her udders, I guess. So also the type of glass that you're using affects the taste of your beer. So if I'm not going to touch on what the different effects are, but the type of glass affects what the flavor of your beer is. So keep that in mind. Also, beer contains almost all the nutrients that you need to survive. So if you really had to, you could survive just drinking beer. So, and actually that's what they did a lot in ancient times, because it was safer to actually drink beer than it was to drink water, because the beer had the anti-biological properties to it. So that's about it.